The primary purpose of this book is to tell the layman the story of the Panama Canal. It is written, therefore, in the simplest manner possible, considering the technical character of the great engineering feat itself, and the involved complexities of the diplomatic history attaching to its inception and undertaking. The temptation to turn aside into the pleasant paths of romantic history of ancient Panama has been resisted. There is no attempt to dispose of political problems that incidentally concern the canal. In short, the book is confined to the story of the canal itself and the things that are directly and vitally connected to it. Colonel Goethals was good enough to read and correct the chapters relating to the construction of the canal, and when shown a list of the chapters proposed, he asked that the one headed "The Man at the Helm" be omitted. The author felt that to bow to his wishes in that matter would be to fail to tell the whole story of the canal, and so Colonel Goethals did not read that chapter. Every American is proud of the great national achievement at Panama. If, in the case of the individual, this book is able to supplement that pride by an ample fund of knowledge and information, its object and purpose will have been attained. I have read the chapters in the Panama Canal dealing with the engineering features of the canal and have found them an accurate and dependable account of the undertaking. Geo W. Goethals. The Panama Canal is a waterway connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, cut through the narrow neck of land connecting the continents of North and South America. It is the solution of the problem of international commerce that became acute in 1452 when the Eastern Roman Empire fell before the assaults of the Turks, and the land routes to India were closed to Western and Christian Europe. 40 years after the crescent supplanted the cross on the dome of St. Sophia in Constantinople, Columbus set sail to seek a western route to the Indies. He did not find it, but it was his fortune to set foot on the Isthmus of Panama, where more than 4 centuries later the goal of his ambition was to be achieved, not by discovery, but by virtue of the strength and wealth of a new nation of which he did not dream, although its existence is due to his own intrepid courage. Columbus died not knowing that he had multiplied the world by 2, and many voyages after him also vainly sought the longed-for western passage. Magellan sought it thousands of leagues to the southward in the cold and stormy seas that encircle the Antarctic continent. Scores of mariners sought it to the northward, but only one, Amundsen, in the 20th century, was able to take a ship through the frozen passages of the American North Seas, down the western coast of the new continent from the eternal ice of Alaska through the tropics to the southern snows of the Tierra del Fuego. The mighty Cordilleras stretch a mountain barrier thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. Where that mountain chain is narrowest and where its peaks are lowest, ships may now go through the Panama Canal. The canal is cut through the narrowest part of the isthmus but one, and through the Culebra Mountain, the lowest pass but one in all that longest, mightiest range of mountains. There is a lower place in Nicaragua and a narrower place on the isthmus east of the canal, but the engineers agreed that the route from Colón on the Atlantic to Panama on the Pacific through Culebra Mountain was the most practicable. The canal is 50 miles long. 15 miles of it is level with the oceans. The rest is higher. Ships are lifted up in giant logs. 3 steps to sail for more than 30 miles across the continental divide. 85 feet above the surface of the ocean, then let down by 3 other locks to sea level again. The channel is 300 feet wide at its narrowest place, and the locks which form the 2 gigantic water stairways are capable of lifting and lowering the largest ships now afloat. A great part of the higher level of the canal is the largest artificial lake in the world, made by impounding the waters of the Chagre River, thus filling with water the lower levels of the section. Another part of the higher level is Culebra Cut, the channel cut through the backbone of the continent. Almost before Columbus died, plans were made for cutting such a channel. With the beginning of the 19th century and the introduction of steam navigation, the demand for the canal began to be insistent. Many plans were made, but it remained for the French on New Year's Day of 1880, actually, to begin the work. They failed, but not before they had accomplished much toward the reduction of Culebra Cut. They expended between 1880 and 1904 no less than 300 million in their ill-fated efforts. In 1904, the United States of America undertook the task. In a decade, it was completed, and the Americans had spent, all told, 375 million in the project. Because the Atlantic lies east and the Pacific west of the United States, one is likely to imagine the canal as a huge ditch cut straight across a neck of land from east to west. But it must be remembered that South America lies eastward from North America, and that the isthmus connecting the two has its axis, east and west. The canal, therefore, is cut from the Atlantic southeastward to the Pacific. It lies directly south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it brings Peru and Chile closer to New York than California and Oregon. The first 7 miles of the canal, beginning at the Atlantic end, run directly south, and from thence to the Pacific it pursues a serpentine course in a southeasterly direction. At the northern or Atlantic terminus are the twin cities of Colón and Cristobal, Colón dating from the middle of the 19th century, when the railroad was built across the isthmus, and Cristobal having its beginnings with the French attempt in 1880. At the southern or Pacific terminus are the twin cities of Panama and Balboa. Panama was founded in 1673 after the destruction by Morgan, the buccaneer, of an elder city established in 1519. The ruins of the old city stand 5 miles east of the new, and since their story is one, it may be said that Panama is the oldest city of the Western world. Balboa is yet in its swaddling clothes, for it is the new American town, destined to be the capital of the American territory encompassing the canal. The waterway is a cut through a strip of territory called the Canal Zone, which to all intents and purposes is a territory of the United States. This zone is 10 miles wide and follows the irregular line of the canal, extending 5 miles on either side from the axis of the channel. This canal zone traverses and separates the territory of the Republic of Panama, which includes the whole of the isthmus and has an area about equal to that of Indiana and a population of 350,000, or about that of Washington City. The two chief Panaman cities, Panama and Colón, lie within the limits of the canal zone, but by the treaty They are accepted from its government and are an integral part of the Republic of Panama, of which the city of Panama is the capital. Cristobal and Balboa, although immediately contiguous to Colon and Panama, are American towns under the American flag. The Canal Zone, historically and commercially, has a record of interest and importance longer and more continuous than any other part of the New World. Columbus himself founded a settlement here at Nombre de Dios. Balboa here discovered the Pacific Ocean. Across this narrow neck was transported the spoil of the devastated empire. The spoil of the devastated empire of the Incas. Here were the ports of call for the Spanish gold-carrying galleons. And here centered the activities of the pirates and buccaneers that were wont to prey on the commerce of the Spanish Main. Over this route, on the shoulders of slaves and the back of mules, were transported the wares and trade of Spain with its colonies, not only on the west coast of the Americas, but with the Philippines. Not far from Colon was the site of the colony of New Caledonia, the disastrous undertaking of the Scotchman Patterson, who founded the Bank of England to duplicate in America the enormous financial success of the East India Company in Asia. Here, in the ancient city of Panama, in the early part of the 19th century, assembled the first Pan-American Conference that gave life to the Monroe Doctrine and ended the era of European colonization in America. Here was built with infinite labor a terrific toll of life the first railroad connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, a railroad less than 50 miles in length, but with perhaps the most interesting story in the annals of railroading. Across this barrier in 1949 clambered the American Argonauts, seeking the newly discovered golden fleeces of California. This was the theater of the failure of Count de Lesseps, the most stupendous financial fiasco in the history of the world. And this now is the site of the most expensive and most successful engineering project ever undertaken by human beings. It cost the French 300 million to fail at Panama, where the Americans, at the expenditure of 375 million, succeeded. And of the excavation done by the French, only 30 million worth was available for the purpose of the Americans. That the Americans succeeded where the French had failed is not to be assigned to the superiority of the American over the French nation. The reasons are to be sought, rather, in the underlying purposes of the two undertakings, and in the scientific and engineering progress made in the double decade intervening between the time when the French failure became apparent and the Americans began their work. In the first place, the French undertook to build the canal as a money-making proposition. People in every grade of social and industrial life in France contributed from their surpluses and from their hard-earned savings money to buy shares in the canal company in the hope that it would yield a fabulously rich return. Estimates of the costs of the undertaking made by the engineers were arbitrarily cut down by financiers. years. With the result that repeated calls were made for more money, and the shareholders soon found, to their dismay, that they must contribute more and yet more before they could hope for any return whatever. From the beginning to the end, the French Canal Company was concerned more with problems of promotion and finance than with engineering and excavation. As a natural result of this spirit at the head of the undertaking, the whole course of the project was marred by an orgy of graft and corruption such as never have been known. Every bit of work was let out by contract, and the contractors uniformly paid corrupt tribute to high officers in the company. No watch was set on expenditures. Everything bought for the canal was bought at prices too high. Everything it had to sell was practically given away. In the next place, the French were pitiably at the mercy of the diseases of the tropics. The science of preventive medicine had not been sufficiently developed to enable the French to know that mosquitoes and filth were enemies that must be conquered and controlled before it would be possible successfully to attack the land barrier. Yellow fever and malaria killed engineers and common laborers alike. The very hospitals which the French provided for the care of the sick were turned into centers of infection for yellow fever, because the beds were set in pans of water which served as ideal breeding places for the death-bearing stegomy. In this atmosphere of lavish extravagance caused by the financial corruption, and in the continual fear of quick and awful death, the morals of the French force were broken. There was no determined spirit of conquest. Interest centered in champagne and women. The canal was neglected. Yet, in spite of this waste, this corruption of money and morals, much of the work done by the French was of permanent value to the Americans, and without the lessons learned from their bitter experience, it would have been impossible for the Americans or any other people to have completed the canal so quickly and so cheaply. The Americans brought to the task another spirit. The canal was to be constructed not in the hope of making money, but rather as a great national and popular undertaking designed to bring the two coasts of the great republic in close communication for the purposes of commerce.